Good afternoon. My name is Whitney Brimfield, and I'm the CEO of SparkPoint Fundraising. And I'm here with Katie Rotramel from Humane Rescue Alliance. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, sure thing. Thanks, Whitney. I'm Katie Rotramel. I've been with Humane Rescue Alliance since 2018, and I serve as the Director of Foundation Relations.
Thanks, Katie. We're going to start the slide presentation now. We're going to say goodbye, and we will take you through it, and I hope it is really helpful.
Thanks, Whitney.
This is a webinar about crafting grant proposals that we are going to walk through with everyone today. We'll start with a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So we will start with a discussion about the fundraising cycle so that everyone understands the process of building a relationship with a foundation. Then we'll go through some basic tips on grant writing and some information about writing and grammar, and then we have some questions and discussion at the end. So we'll jump right in. Grant writing basics. This is a visual representation of the process that we go through when we are building a relationship with a new potential funder. So it starts with identify. That is when you do prospect research or research to find foundations that align with your organization's work. And then once you identify those, you find ways to connect to individuals who are in that organization through your existing network and communicate with them about your organization and what your projects are that you're looking to fund. That communication usually happens via email or ideally on a phone call that you have with a program officer. And then you cultivate that relationship by continuing communication, having additional conversations with the foundation, and ultimately coming to an agreement about a proposal, whether it's invited or not, whether the fit is there or not. All of that is a process of cultivation with a foundation program officer. Once you've gone through that cultivation process, you send in a proposal. And that is the solicit step in the process. So part of what this is meant to illustrate for you is that grant writing is not just about writing a grant proposal. It's really much more about building a relationship that is then solidified by a grant proposal. So this process is as important to grant writing as the actual writing of the proposal itself. And then presuming that you solicit successfully and the proposal is funded, you will have to do work on the back end to maintain that relationship with that funder so that you're giving them all the information that they need, managing reporting deadlines, and keeping them informed about the work of your organization so that in future you can ask for more money from the funder. That's the ultimate goal. For some of you who might have experience in sales, this is very similar to a sales cycle. So that might be a helpful way to think about it. But that is a basic overview of the funding cycle.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Like when I can kind of think of a time where we came across an organization in the past and it was a new funder. It was one who had never funded us before. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the identify stage. And so, you're looking around, you find this organization, oh, this could be a really good fit. I think they'd be interested in the work that we're doing. And so, I reached out to communicate with them and say, hey, this is what we do. Is this something you'd be interested in working with us and helping fund? So that kind of leads into that communication and cultivating at the same time, right? So there was some back and forth, meetings and phone calls. it also kind of gives a chance to really be connected to your program officer at that organization, and get to know what they're truly interested in and build a personal relationship. Because I think that's also part of this is, you know, humans working with humans. And in doing so, you also have a chance to share all the great things that your organization is doing and kind of, you know, be the face of the organization in a way of like, hey, we're doing all this great work, come be a part of this, help fund. And so that kind of led into the solicit phase, where we, you know, basically had asked if we can submit a proposal, and we're told, yeah, please do. So, you know, that was in that process of like the pure proposal writing and doing called the nitty gritty of it. And we were really lucky. They liked us and they wanted us to be part of their grants and to join the team per se. And so what that meant afterwards is that we kind of had to continue that relationship with them. It's not just here's the money, goodbye.
Right.
No, they're invested literally. And also they want to know, you know, how are you doing? What challenges are you facing? How are things going? And so that stewardship phase is really important because it again continues being that human side of things. It continues forming relationships. It continues showing all of the great work that you're doing. And just here's a report, here's what we did with the money, and then that's it. And through that relationship building and helping them really truly see how dynamic your organization is, then it really kind of helps it lend itself more comfortably right back into that funding cycle for the next round.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Katie, for that. One thing that we forgot to mention at the beginning is that we are intending to take kind of a conversational style with this webinar so that it's a little more interesting to listen to. So that's why we're kind of having this chat that we're having. So thank you, Katie.
Sure thing.
So I want to just jump into some grant writing tips. So this is about once you get to the solicit phase of the cycle, how do you do a good job writing a grant? Most of the things on this list may seem obvious, although not always. Anybody who has experience with marketing certainly though understands the concept of knowing your audience. And what's important about that is part of your job in writing a grant is to help the foundation see where the alignment is between what they're trying to accomplish and the mission of your organization. So when you're preparing to write a proposal, you should have a really strong understanding of what the foundation's interests are. And you should be thoughtful about how to connect your work to those priorities. And so that's what know your audience means. It requires that you do a little bit of background research on the foundation before you write the proposal. And if you've gone through that process, that funding cycle process that we just described, you will also learn more about the foundation from those conversations that you have with them. But foundation websites, which many foundations do have websites, those are also a good source of information for these kinds of things. Many times a funder has a specific way that they want you to format your proposal with specific questions that they want you to answer, and they provide all of that information in the form of application guidelines or proposal guidelines, or sometimes it's even called a request for proposals. It's a formal document that they issue to anyone who is interested in applying for a given grant. Whatever information you have from the foundation about how they want the proposal structured and what information they want included should be something that you rely on heavily. The guidance is there for a reason, and it's because this is the way the foundation has decided to make their decisions. So they need answers to the questions that they're asking because it's part of their decision-making process to know the answers to those questions. So when you're answering those questions, you should be thoughtful about, as you know your audience, using language that you think will resonate with them. And one easy way to do this is as you're going through their website and listening to them talk to you on phone calls, you're going to hear them use various words and phrases a lot. You'll want to take note of those things that they repeat. You'll want to use the same words that they do to describe the type of project that you're going to do. So for example, if you are a shelter and the foundation talks about keeping shelter animals, you're getting shelter animals out of the shelter, then you'll have to use the words that they use to describe that process as opposed to maybe the words that you might use. It's not something to be overly attentive to, but it is a helpful way to make a reader feel like you really understand their interests if you're using their language. And another thing that's a big challenge with grant writing is that it's not just a simple process of writing down stuff, answering questions. There's also a whole component of additional information that the funder is going to need in the form of attachments, which we're going to go through in more detail later. There's often extra questions that come up at the end of the grant writing process that are a part of the application that we don't always anticipate. So project management and understanding all the moving pieces of submitting a grant proposal is really important to success. And that's why it takes so much time, because it's not just about the writing, it's about all of the other pieces that go along with the proposal to support a full package of information. So that's important to keep track of the process in addition to the content. And then as you're writing, you need to make connections for the reader. So you're writing about your organization, you want to portray it in the way that's most relevant to the reader. Part of that is using their language, reading the guidance, and knowing your audience. And then part of it is, as often as possible, using storytelling to share what you're trying to convey, rather than just listing out a process or steps. And probably this is something that we can elaborate on more, but also it's important to be specific. If you have to make a reader work to understand what you're trying to tell them, it's going to be a less effective proposal. And that's a way also that you can instill confidence in a funder, is you want your proposal to be compelling, easy to read, and interesting. So those are all things that will instill confidence, along with, as a part of the attachments, your financial information that you will have to share is another way that foundations evaluate their potential grantees that could instill confidence if things are looking good or may require additional explanation. And then it's always appropriate to ask questions if you need more help or need help understanding something that's in the guidance or on the website. It's always a possibility to ask questions of the foundation.
Yeah, I know we'll get back into that a little bit later about asking questions, but it is super important, again, as part of that, cultivating that relationship with the foundation. And more likely than not, you may get like a program officer that you can reach back to, you know, in the same person, which is always helpful in building that relationship. But one of the things I know, like, I really want to highlight, and I know it can be really hard when you're just jumping into grant writing for the first time, is reading the guidance. And I just want to emphasize that I know that's tough, because each foundation and organization often has their own guidance, which means, you know, it's not always a cut and paste type of situation. You may really have to craft things very specifically down to, you know, word count. A proposal may require, you know, a 200 word answer, and the next one basically has 2,000 words. And so, you know, reading that guidance, I think, is so critical, because it really kind of sets up the shell of how much you are able to talk about your program that you're asking funding for, and how depth you can go. And sometimes those word counts are really light, and you really have to, you know, just stick with the very key facts and make it sound compelling in such a short amount of space. So those kind of things I think are really important and really critical, that once you identify a possible fit for you to submit a proposal, to really look over that, to understand how, you know, how much work it will take you, so you can manage your time appropriately to get that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. We'll just move right along. We're going to take you through some examples of things that make a proposal successful and things that, on the other hand, are often unsuccessful. And a lot of this maps back to what we were just talking about, understanding the foundation and its interests. What are they trying to achieve with their investments, and how does that relate to the work that you guys are doing on your missions? So it's important to really make that strong connection between their interests and goals and your work. And then it's also important that you make your proposal compelling. Part of being compelling is not using jargon and words like industry words that a foundation funder might not know or might not understand. Also the same with acronyms. Things need to be spelled out and explained so that that funders understand what you're telling them and you're not making assumptions about what they already know. And then easy to read, obviously everybody wants to have things that are easy to read in front of them when they're reading huge piles of documents, which all of those program officers are. So easy to read is really about copy editing and making sure that your grammar is well aligned and all of those things. Part of a successful proposal is also, why do you need this money now? What's the need that you're providing? And often there's a question, or the need that you're fulfilling. So sorry, often there's a question about need in a proposal. So it's something that you'll always have to be thinking about. But there should be some level of urgency around what you're trying to accomplish and why you need the money now. We all know why you need the money now, because everybody always is having challenges with fundraising, but that's not enough of a justification for a foundation because everybody who comes to them is having that challenge. And then a part of your proposal will often be some kind of project plan, either for your whole organization or for one specific program within it. So that part of the proposal needs to be really well thought out in advance and clear, and show that it's not only well thought out, but also something that you can feasibly accomplish. So you'll have to be able to demonstrate how you're going to do the things that you're going to do and be effective, right? Like the next bullet describes. And then another important element of a grant proposal is deciding how much money to ask for. Typically funders will have information, or you'll be able to access information about their typical grant size. Sometimes that information is included in the proposal guidelines. But it's important to know that if you're asking a foundation for a $50,000 grant, let's say, that's a type of size of grant that they've made before. What you don't want to do is go to an organization that makes an average grant of $10,000 and ask them for 50, because then they will see that disconnect. So that's another part of knowing your audience, is understanding kind of what is the funding level that they typically offer. And then again, another thing that makes proposal writing challenging is that it's not all about the written narrative. Part of it is about what budget information you provide. So depending on the type of proposal that you're submitting, whether it's for the general operations of your entire organization, or if it's for a specific program or project within that, you need to present a really clear budget of how much money it's going to cost to do the work that you're planning to do, and how much money you need to raise in order to do that, and outlined in various types, just like any budget. But it is a really important part of your proposal, and the budget and the narrative in the proposal need to be aligned and connected to each other so that a funder understands how you're going to fund the work aside from their specific investment, and how you're going to spend the money. And then the final thing is, it's important to differentiate yourself from other organizations. There are millions of nonprofits in the United States, and many of them have similar missions. So it's important that you really be thoughtful about what is the unique space that your organization sits in, what is the unique thing that you are capable of, that you are achieving related to your mission, and make sure that you really are clear with funders in your proposals about what differentiates your organizations from others doing similar work. And often that will be a question that they directly ask of you, so it's something to be thoughtful about all the time. That was a lot.
Yeah, it is, but there's something hidden in two of those bullets that I think I just want to pull out what lies behind them. So you mentioned, having the really strong, plan, and also the cost-effective budget. And for me, what lies behind that is that creating the proposal is not a one-person job. It probably is going to call upon a lot of teamwork from you to get help and input from your colleagues in your organization, whether that's, you know, working with whoever is in charge of finances, whoever is on the boots on the ground with running a program, whatever it may be. Unless you're very small, like 1 or 2 person organization, usually you're going to have to kind of work with your team and, you know, get some input or information from them. So just remember that it's not just you. It may be, you know, more on you to kind of pull everything together and make sense of it and submit it and, you know, cultivate that relationship with the funder and so forth. But it's really imperative that you work with your team in whatever way necessary to kind of have the whole organization behind it to some degree.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point, Katie. Thank you. That is really important to know. And I think that's another reason why project management is so important with grant proposals, is that there are a lot of moving parts, but there are also a lot of people that need to be a part of creating those moving parts. So I think that's a really important thing to think about.
Absolutely. And if you're proposing anything brand new to the team, make sure you talk it over with them beforehand, because it can be very, very hard for those in the program side for you to just hand something to them and say, okay, now we do it this way. So do be aware if you're going to involve, you know, brand new ideas, you really want the input of the folks who are going to have to implement that.
Yes, that's also a really good point. All right, and so let's talk about unsuccessful proposals. Essentially, an unsuccessful proposal is the opposite of all the things we just listed as successful. So that's pretty well mapped out here for you. I think that the biggest downfall that folks have in grant writing and in this process is not making those connections for the foundation, for the program officer who's reading your proposal, between the work that you're doing and the work that they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish, right? So ultimately, the most important thing that you convey to them is why you're a good partner for helping them achieve their goals. And that you can do that effectively because you understand the work and how to do it. So that's where that program plan comes into play. Another thing that we didn't talk about before that is also very important is data. Whatever data you track in your organization is important to share with your potential funders, if it's relevant and compelling to the case you're trying to make. But data is a way that foundations measure success and understand impact. So things like the number of animals in the shelter, the number of animals removed from the street. I don't know, Katie, what are other data points that a shelter might be gathering?
Oh, it could be anything. You know, the amount of animals coming in, the amount of adoptions any given month, adoptions between cats and dogs and other animals. There's just so many things that, you know, would paint a clear picture of all of the activities going on in the shelter.
Right. Yeah. It's a way to tell the story, in addition to the words and the narrative that you're sharing, that you actually have hard evidence of what you're saying. And so there's the challenge of including the data in the proposal, but there's also the challenge of tracking the data over time so that you have the information you need when you are ready to submit a proposal. We could do a whole other webinar about the data piece of proposal writing. So we won't go into too much detail now, but it's important to share whatever data you have with your funders when you're writing proposals. Katie, did you have anything else you wanted to add here?
I think this is pretty comprehensive. I mean, there's always stuff you're going to learn along the way, for sure. And also, I think, you know, again, just going back to each funder is different from another, and each may have a different approach and different interests. And so just being hyper aware of what that funder is most interested in being a part of, that you can really speak to that.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about attachments. Attachments are
Dun,
those
dun, dun.
attachments are those things that we were referring to earlier that are things that the foundation asks for in addition to your written proposal. So these are things like your IRS 501c3 determination letter. This is if you are a nonprofit organization, most likely you have a copy of this. It may sit with your executive director, it may sit with your finance person, or if you are in a smaller shop, you probably already know what it is. They're also going to be asking for budget information like we talked about. Depending on the type of grant you're requesting, it may be that they need a full operating budget for the organization, or it may be that they just want to see the budget for the specific project that you're asking for support for. They're also going to want to see your financial statements. A financial statement, for those who don't know, is a demonstration of the organization's financial health. So the two most common are a balance sheet, which shows the assets that the organization has in hand and the liabilities that they have outstanding, and gives the funder a picture of kind of the big picture sustainability. What is the organization's asset base? And then there is what's called a statement of activities, or a profit and loss is also a way that is described, which is essentially it outlines what your actual expenses are and what your actual revenue is. Oftentimes it's presented compared to your budget. So in that case, it's referred to as a budget to actual. Any of these are things that a foundation might request in terms of financial statements. And they should be things that are easily accessible from your finance department or your accountant, bookkeeper, or if you are a small shop, as many are, maybe you already know about this. They're also going to want to see a list of board members, and in some cases also a list of staff and bios about the staff. So that's just a way for them to see who from the community is engaged in your work. And oftentimes it's possible that your board members might have connections with foundation board members or with foundation program officers. So having that list in your proposal can provide some helpful social confirmation for the foundation that you are a real and effective organization. And then an audit report, if you're required to complete an audit, you will have to submit those audit reports to your funders along with your most recent 990 form. For those of you who don't know what a 990 form is, it's a nonprofit organization's tax return documents. Both the audit and the tax return are other ways that a foundation assesses an organization's financial health. And then many foundation funders will want to see a list of who else is funding you. This is another way that they confirm for themselves that you're a legitimate organization that will be effective. It's just another way that, like any investor, they're trying to confirm that you're a good investment. So when other funders are investing, that makes you a stronger investment to a new funder. And then there are sometimes other things that funders ask for that are more specific. That maybe, I don't know, Katie, do you have an example of one of those things that's not like a typical that you've come across?
One you mentioned bios of staff, or sometimes like knowing who the top staff are, and once in a while that kind of stuff pops up. You know, I'm sure I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm certain I've come across a few where I'm like, this one's new.
Yeah, me too. I'm trying to think of something. It's like this is a really obscure one, but it just came up recently. There's a foundation that asks asks that you include in a proposal a letter from your board chair confirming that the organization is a 501c3. That's like a really weird one that it only ever had to do for that one funder, but it's an example of like, sometimes they ask for weird stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You have to create.
It's true. It's true. And it was, you know, with those outliers, like put to the side, good thing about attachments is, yes, it can be very difficult to pull this together initially. But once you have it together, you just have it ready to go, and you know it'll be good for at least a year usually. And so once you have it in a nice safe spot, it's easy to pull. But I know sometimes that initial, when you're just starting out, you know, pulling together these attachments, it can be daunting, and it involves asking a lot of different people on the team or board members or whomever, you know, for help to pull it together. So, you know, it could be a lot of work up front, but once you got it in one spot, then it's there and waiting for you for future grants.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. Most grant writers have a folder somewhere in their files that is called attachments, where they just save all of these documents so that they're easily accessible. And that is a best practice that I would highly recommend. Great. So once you've pulled everything together, you've written the proposal, you've polished it, it's perfect, wonderful, and you have all of your attachments, you have to actually submit the proposal. Typically, a foundation will give you guidance on how to do that. They may prefer that you mail it in. There may be an online form that you fill out, or they may ask that you send it via email. The other thing that isn't on here, but is a new trend in foundations, is some foundations are starting to request video proposals instead of written proposals, in an effort to make proposal writing easier, where you would just get on you know, casual video on your phone or whatever and share a story. That's just something that you might see in the future, not too much to worry about now. But let's just talk quickly about the different ways that you might submit a proposal. So by mail is obvious, right? You print everything out, you put in an envelope with an address and mail it. Online submissions tend to be a little bit more complex. They typically require you to create an account with an online program that they share via a website. Typically, you then go to that form online and see all the different questions that need to be answered. And that is often where the word limits and character limits come in. Foundations don't want to be reading pages and pages and pages of information when they're looking at hundreds or even thousands of proposals. So they often will make limits on how long you can have your answers. And that's really important to pay attention to, because if you go over the limit, it will cut off after you get to the limit. So you don't want to miss giving them any information because you've gone over the character limits. And that's a big pain. It's one of the most annoying things about being a grant writer, but it's something that you get used to.
It is.
Yeah. And then as part of that online submission process, there will be a page in the form about uploading attachments. So there will be a place where you upload your financial statements, a place where you upload your board list. All of those things will have their own place on the online form. And eventually you'll get to the end of the form and it will give you the option to review and submit. And once you feel like it's all in there and all the language is the way you want it, you should submit the proposal at that button. One way to make sure that what you're inputting into the form is really what you want it to be is to write the answers to all of the questions in a Word document, edit them, perfect them, make sure that the character limits are correct, and then cut and paste it into the form. It's much better to do that than to try to type in the form as you go, because the forms will time out, things might not get saved. It's just much faster if you can just quickly cut and paste answers into the question boxes, and make the online submission the last step in the process. So once you hit submit on a proposal online, the system will generate a PDF version of the contents of what you've included in the form. It's essentially like a PDF of the filled out form that you've just completed. So you should make sure to save a copy of that for your records, just so you have it. I'd also suggest saving the Word document where you have the final answers so that you can repurpose that language in the future. I think that another aspect of grant writing is keeping track of all the information that you're creating when you do this. So you should be thoughtful about how to save files so that they're easy to find later. Mail and email submissions should be accompanied by a cover letter. And if you're sending an email, a brief, obviously transmittal. So a cover letter is a one-page document that's signed by your executive director or your board chair or whoever the highest level person is in the organization, with an overview of your proposal, the amount of money that you're asking for, and some language about why you guys are a good fit for whatever funder it is that you're submitting. Each mail and email submission should have that, and all of that should be included in a package, obviously. And when it's an email, obviously you would do an attachment and then have to write another short email that says, thank you very much for this opportunity. Our proposal is attached here. Just something really simple. But these are all steps in the process that you don't always think of at the beginning. So it's important to think through all of this. And like we talked about in the beginning of the funding cycle, it's always better to talk to somebody at the foundation before you submit a proposal. Sometimes it's not possible. Some foundations don't want to talk to you unless they're interested in what you've submitted, but many are very willing to get on the phone and chat, because they don't want to be inundated with proposals that aren't relevant to them. So it's important to them that they are able to communicate. And also, some foundations don't allow unsolicited proposals. So even if you were to send something, they wouldn't read it unless they had a conversation and invited you to apply. So that relationship building process is really important. It's not always possible to do in advance, but you should try, if you can, as much as possible to do that.
Yeah, I would just give one tip for all of this, the submission process, which you kind of touched upon a little bit with, creating a Word document outside of the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Once we identify a possible fit and a good, a grant that we're going to go after and create a proposal for, what I always do is kind of open up the document, or especially again, if it's in a portal for online submission, open that up, grab all the questions, put them in a document that I can then work off of directly for that, before I cut and paste it back in. But that whole process also gives you a chance to really look at the questions that they'll be asking and understand how in depth those questions are. There have been times where I've opened up, opened up the questions and saw that they were relatively simple. I'm like, oh, okay, and this helps for time management. But there have definitely been other times where I'm like, wow, they are really going deep into some things, and it's going to take me quite a while to, get these answers together and working with my team to get the right answers, and then having that all, clean and ready for submission. So the process of looking at the questions that are being asked, pulling those aside into a different document, is helpful for so many reasons, one of which is just that time management, which is so critical, and especially because you're working on a hard deadline. And the deadline is often for submission, it's very tight. You can't send in afterwards. So all of it is critical to just really understand, like, what amount of effort will it take to do this?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And another one to keep in mind is that attention to detail is a critical skill in this whole process. Proposals are sometimes won and lost on those details. So it's important to really pay close attention to them. And
it's
I
true.
think that, go ahead, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was going to mention, yeah, that's absolutely true. And it even goes back to that, word count thing we were talking about. You might see something and say, oh, it's only, 200 words. I can answer that. And then when you start, you realize, oh, wow, this doesn't answer the question at all because it's not enough. So that attention to detail really is critical, that you are hitting all those high points of answering the question, being clear, having it all in the correct format, making sure your grammar and editing is done well, all of those things.
Yes, thank you. So we wanted to give you guys a little bit of writing guidance, because obviously writing is a really big part of this. So we're going to go through some high-level information about grammar and things like that, but the slides that we're going to share along with this proposal will go into more detail about each of these things. So we'll just quickly give you some common writing pitfalls. So one thing that I find really helpful is the book Elements of Style. It's it was written a long time ago, but it's still very relevant, and it's actually quite easy to read. And I refer to it often. It's helpful just for understanding various grammar rules, and because there's lots of stuff that we don't think about on a daily basis because it's innate to us as native speakers of a language, or if you're not a native speaker, you're probably much more aware of that than we are, that we who are native speakers. But these are some important things to think about. Passive voice is a huge one. I'm sure you heard about when you were in school taking English class. It's one of the most basic elements of good writing is that you don't want to have passive voice. And passive voice is when you talk about things as having happened in the past as opposed to being in the present. It's hard to demonstrate vocally, but you'll see it in the slides that we're going to share, some examples of passive voice and how to fix it. A similar thing is unparalleled structure. So when you're listing out a series of things in a sentence, separated by commas, if each of those things has a verb in it, so like we're going to build a shelter and then bring dogs to it and then take care of those dogs, just to make it real simple, each of those verbs should be the same tense. You don't want it to say, we're gonna building a dog shelter and then bring dogs to it and then we will have taken care of those dogs. Like those things don't, they're not all the same structure. So that's what that means. It's also, we have a detailed slide about that we'll share in the webinar slides. Another one is that versus which. They have different meanings and people often use them interchangeably when they shouldn't. So that's also detailed in those extra slides. Inconsistent verb tenses, similar to unparalleled structure, but not just in a list, right? So you want to make sure you're always writing in the present tense or in the future tense when you're talking about your work. The other thing, and this goes back to what we were talking about regarding jargon, if you're too wordy, it's really hard to read writing that's too wordy. I'm sure everyone has read something at some point in their life where they were overwhelmed by the number of words and just felt like it was too much to read. And the way to deal with verbosity is to have other people edit your work. And we're going to talk about reviewing proposals and editing in a future slide. But I think the most important thing to think about there is it's really hard to edit your own writing. So you should have somebody else on hand to help to review documents before you submit them and to give you feedback so that you can see where maybe your argument needs to be clarified or tightened a little bit, where you can get rid of extra words, things like that. More than likely, there is somebody in your organization who's really good at editing. It may not be a person that's in your department. So it's worth trying to find somebody that you work with who's really a strong editor, or somebody in your universe of people that is a strong editor. It's really helpful, especially when you're first starting out, to have somebody that can give you feedback. And it may be that that's a board member if you're a one-person shop or a smaller organization. That's a really potentially helpful role for board members to play, because they sit in the space similar to where the foundation program officer is, of having some knowledge of the organization's work, but not the necessarily deep knowledge that you have, right? So they can be a helpful partner in that. And then finally, commas are often misplaced and misused. And again, we have a detailed slide that we'll share in the presentation after the fact about how to use commas, but people tend to use them more than they should usually. So those, we just really sped through a very high level overview of good grammar. But Katie, I don't know, do you have anything you think we should add to this?
No, it could go on and on, but I think it's a good start.
Yeah, so when we send the slides along with this recording, we will have more detail about each of these points that you can review on your own. And I also highly recommend that you buy and read Elements of Style. It's not a long book and it's not expensive, but it is incredibly helpful. All right, so I just got finished saying that it's hard to edit your own writing, and it is, but there are ways to do it if you need to. My general rule of thumb is that it's easy to correct grammar as you go, right? You're writing, you can make perfections to your sentences, make sure that everything is right. It's easier to make edits to the content after you've gotten everything down on paper, and then you're able to go back through it. So here are a few things that I found helpful in the past in terms of editing one's own work or even someone else's. One thing that you can do is read the proposal aloud to yourself or to another person. Sometimes you will hear things when you're reading that you wouldn't necessarily hear when you're reading out loud, that you wouldn't necessarily hear if you were reading just to yourself. And then often I find it's easier to edit your own work if you do it in a different place than you wrote the proposal. It's just a mental thing. So I often will, if I'm editing my own work, I'll print out a draft of my proposal and go sit in a completely different room with no distractions and read it page by page, take notes on the document of where you see things that you think need to be tightened up. That is just, I think, a helpful practice, especially as you're starting out. Another thing is write your draft, go away from it for 24 hours and then come back with fresh eyes. I think that's another way to helpful tip for self-editing. And you should also, and again, this gets back to project management, you need time to do the editing. So the writing process is not just the writing itself, it's also the honing that you do in the editing process. So if you're working with somebody else as your editor, it's important that you give them the best draft that you could possibly create. Now, that might not be something that's perfect. It may be something that's really rough. But it's important that you give as much as you can to that first draft because it will make the whole process easier. And generally, editing takes longer than writing, in part because you're usually passing it back and forth between one or more people, or two or more people, but also because it's hard. And especially if you're doing it yourself, it's hard.
It definitely, the other thing I'd like to add is give it one last read, especially if multiple people have worked on it before you submit, because I have found that sometimes what happens is if you have several people working on something and they're doing like track changes and so forth in the document, sometimes everything gets deleted, but then there's like a random, punctuation mark or a letter just hanging in there. So give it one last read once everyone has done the editing for both yourself and anyone else who are asking to help you, so that you're catching all of those little bits and pieces that are literally just hanging around.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And if you have somebody in your organization that is a copy editor or who has experience with copy editing, they could also be the person who does that final read. Copy editors tend to be really detail oriented and find all of those little things that we don't always see ourselves. So that's really helpful if you have someone that can play that role. Katie, do you have anything else to add here?
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. All right, so let's move on. We elicited some questions from the field that we thought might be helpful for us to answer. So we're going to talk through those and let's just jump in. So the first question is, are all grant requirements the same?
I can jump in on this one. So they are not. They are not the same. As we talked about before, each funder has their own set of guidelines and their own list of attachments and all of the their own type of questions. So definitely they're not all the same, and it really takes that double, triple, quadruple review of what the funder is asking for so that you can provide it and answer it correctly. I'll ask the next one. Maybe Whitney, you can answer it. So it says, what happens if you are not able to use the money that's given to you? Can it be allocated for something else?
Sorry about that. If you're not able to use the money that's given to you, it would be a problem. So usually funding that is allocated for a specific purpose is not able to be used for other purposes. And typically what that is called is a restricted grant. So if your grant is restricted to a specific project and you write a grant proposal for that project and you ask for money for that project, you have to use the money for that project. And the parameters of what is allowed and what is not allowed and how you spend the money are outlined in what's called a grant agreement, which is a document that you sign when you accept the foundation's money, that agrees to various stipulations, things that you have to do. It gives you information about reporting and all of those things. And in that agreement is typically a section that outlines how the money is allowed to be spent. If you have a general operating support grant, that means that the money is going to your organization's general fund. So it can be used for whatever expense is necessary within the scope of the organization's budget. So certainly if you get a grant for your organization, whether it's a general operating support grant or a restricted grant, the money has to be spent on the organization. It cannot be spent on any one individual separate from the organization. So I think that's also a helpful thing. The next question is it ethical to reach out to the organization awarding the grant with questions on the application?
Yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely, and it's encouraged, especially if you have questions. That's all part of that, building that relationship with the funder and your program officer at that organization. So not only is it ethical, but it is encouraged.
Yes.
Is there somewhere that folks can find a list of current available grants?
Yes, there are multiple sources of information about foundations and grant funding. Probably the largest is the Foundation Directory Online, which is a part of Candid. That is an organization that helps nonprofits connect with potential funders, and they have a database that is searchable that you can use to find information about grants that might be supported to your mission. Other sources of information include current foundation funders. So if you already have some foundation funding, it's not unreasonable to ask your current funders which other funders they know that might be interested in supporting you. Another place that you can get information about available grants is there's a website called Grant Station that has a newsletter that they send out, I think once a week, that you can sign up for, that has a fairly comprehensive listing of open RFPs. There's a similar, I think, daily email or weekly email that you can get from the Foundation Center online called the Philanthropy News Digest that also has similar listings. And then, of course, Google can be a really helpful tool as well. Oh, so the next question is, once the grant application is turned in and completed, can it be edited, or is that up to the organization awarding the funds?
It's a good question. So the point is really to have a very complete proposal to submit so that what you're presenting is essentially done. It is good to go. No edits need to be done. Nothing needs to be updated. And that is part of this whole process we just talked about for the last hour of getting it into a really great spot and having it completed so that you can submit it. Now, the funder may come back with questions, and that's entirely okay, and that does happen. So that may be a chance, if those questions lead to a situation where it may be worth editing, that will really be up to the funder. They may say, okay, why don't we, have you edit this and update this? That could happen, but really the goal is to imagine that it won't, to imagine that what you're turning in is complete. The other thing that could happen is, you may have updates. You may submit something, and then a month later, while you're still waiting, there may be some major update to the program that you were asking a grant for. And that would be a case where you could reach back to the program officer and say, hey, we have this amazing update I'd like to share with you. What's the best way to do that? So that goes back into that conversation and communication and relationship building with the foundation itself to see what guidance they would give on that. Whitney, what is the easiest way to search for available grants?
So all of the things I just outlined, Foundation Directory Online, Grant Station, other funders, Google, those are all ways to search for available grants. I think the easiest is the Foundation Center Online. It's an online database. One of the strategic things that you should think about when you're searching for grants is what keywords you use to identify funders. So you're going to want to think about keywords that are relevant to your work. Often in relation to animal welfare, there's like animal welfare could be one of them, animal shelter might be one of them. Those are the kinds of words you want to think about. Or if you're focused on a specific program, maybe you have a veterinary clinic as part of your shelter, you might use the veterinary medicine as one of your keywords. So it's important to think carefully about what keywords you use when you're doing those searches. And it takes a lot of time. You want to try a lot of different keywords, and you'll find different information when you search for different keywords. But also, if you find that you're using, you do your search with different keywords and you have similar or the same foundations coming up every time you do that with a different keyword, then that's likely a foundation that's going to be a stronger fit. But I would say it takes a lot of time, and it's something that if you're responsible for grant writing in your organization, doing this kind of searching on a regular basis and just setting aside time to do that is a good use of your time. The next question is, I've heard that only nonprofits are eligible for grants. Is this true?
That's a great question. And I think that you may get into that a little bit more with the next question, but most funders or at least foundations fund 501c3, which are nonprofits. That's not to say all, and usually it will be very clearly defined on the website if there is one for the foundation, if it says that they're willing to fund anything other than a 501c3, whether that's an individual or government entities. But generally speaking, the majority of foundations are looking to fund 501c3s. Which leads into, hey, Whitney, what can you do to get grants if you're not eligible because you are a government-run shelter?
It's a great question. There are government agencies that have affiliated foundations, and this is using the term foundation differently from a funder that gives out funds. It's another way of using the word, but they create essentially a 501c3 arm of their agency. So if you're able to do that, it's not a simple process, and it's maybe not the right choice for every government-run agency. But if it's possible to do, that is one way to access grant funding. The other way to access grant funding might be through a federal, or if you're if you're a municipality, the state government potentially can offer funding to you. So if, for example, you are working in New York City as in a government agency, there are likely grants that you can apply for from the state of New York to fund your work. Government funders tend to be more open in who they're willing to give money to in some cases than foundations, and that's in part because foundations have really specific restrictions from the IRS about what they can and can't give money to. Those are the questions that we have received from you guys that we ran through just now. I think if you have additional questions after viewing this webinar, Katie is a resource to you, and so am I. We've shared our contact information at the end here of our slides, and of course you will receive a copy of these slides, and they will be available on the Humane Rescue Alliance website. And I want to thank you all for listening to us today. We hope this was really helpful. And I want to turn it over to you, Katie, for whatever you have to add in closing.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks so much for helping guide us through this. And I hope that this helped kind of alleviate any initial fears or worries or concerns if you're jumping into grant writing for the first time. I know it can seem very daunting and scary, but it's not. It's not. It really isn't. Just take it as its own project, and piece by piece, and you know, you'll do it, and you'll do it well. So thank you for being here with us and listening, and we wish you great success.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.